This is the Strait of Hormuz. It is a narrow waterway that serves as the transit point for 20% of the world's daily energy supply. Since the West Asia conflict escalated in February 2026, the waterway has been effectively blockaded. Very few cargo ships or tankers have been permitted to cross. We previously analyzed how an escalating conflict in this region would test the Indian economy. The immediate concern was a disruption to energy supplies and a resulting blow to India's structural unit economics. The government has mobilized to manage the fallout. Prime Minister Modi has convened emergency ministerial meetings to monitor the petroleum and fertilizer sectors, while conducting direct diplomatic outreach to leaders in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. This chart breaks down the scale of the exposure. India imports 85 to 90% of its crude oil and nearly half of its natural gas. Domestic production represents only a fraction of total consumption. Global markets reacted to the blockade immediately. Brent crude prices surged 49% month over month. That global energy shock is now hitting the domestic market. In March, India's wholesale price index, or WPI inflation, jumped to 3.88%. That sharp rise in wholesale inflation is a direct reflection of the spike in energy prices triggered by the West Asia crisis. The immediate price at the pump hides a deeper vulnerability: the fossil agricultural do loop. India maintains a heavily subsidized dependency on imported fossil fuels, specifically to manufacture agricultural inputs. The disruption in the strait creates a sequence that extends far beyond the energy sector. It begins with fertilizer shortages and leads to widening fiscal deficits, which ultimately impacts the cost of every household meal. The paradox of India's food security is that it relies heavily on hidden energy imports. The agriculture sector consumes roughly 60 million tons of chemical fertilizer every single year. That volume makes India the second largest fertilizer consumer in the world, right behind China, leaving the nation uniquely vulnerable to global supply shocks. The chemical transmission mechanism works like this. Imported natural gas is processed to extract hydrogen. That hydrogen is used to produce ammonia, which is then synthesized into urea fertilizer, which finally goes into the soil. Closing the Strait of Hormuz severs this chain at its origin. The vast majority of India's fertilizer and raw material imports come from Gulf countries through that specific maritime corridor. The domestic impact is already visible. Natural gas supplies to Indian fertilizer factories have been cut by 30%. This chart tracks agricultural performance from 1951 to the present. The first line shows a remarkable achievement. Grain yields grew 5 times over, reaching over 2,500 kilograms per hectare. But the second line reveals the hidden cost of that yield. To get a 5x increase in food, chemical fertilizer consumption had to explode by 280 times. The soil has become completely dependent on these inputs. Soil health data from major grain-producing states like Punjab and Haryana indicates the limits of this system. Years of chemical overuse have contaminated groundwater and left farmlands on the brink of becoming dead soil. Knowing that their degraded land requires heavy inputs to yield anything, farmers in Punjab are currently panicking. Many are hoarding fertilizers ahead of the Kharif sowing season, despite government assurances that buffer stocks are adequate. Modern Indian agriculture operates as a massive industrial mechanism for converting imported natural gas into edible calories. Because of that chemical link, an energy blockade inevitably becomes a food crisis. To prevent an immediate agricultural collapse and keep food prices stable, the Indian government acts as a financial shock absorber between volatile global markets and domestic farmers. You can see the scale of that intervention by looking at a single 45-kilogram bag of urea. The global import cost of that bag is 2,200 rupees, but the Indian farmer pays only 242 rupees. The remaining 1,958 rupees is absorbed directly by the taxpayer. That massive spread acts as a direct drain on government revenues. This establishes an incredibly high baseline for fiscal stress. In the 2023-24 financial year, India already spent more than 1.8 trillion rupees solely on fertilizer subsidies. With energy prices surging due to the blockade, the total macroeconomic damage is accelerating. Current estimates suggest this exploding subsidy bill is creating a fiscal loss of 1.32 lakh crore rupees annually. This is the core of the doom loop. Highly subsidized, cheap fertilizers encourage overuse. That overuse damages the soil, which then requires even more fertilizer the next year, further driving up the subsidy bill. This expanding deficit creates severe secondary effects. Every rupee spent masking the true cost of imported fertilizer is a rupee cannibalized from state capital expenditure and infrastructure development. State finances are coming under intense pressure. A broader economic slowdown reduces overall tax collections, meaning states have fewer resources to manage the mounting costs of the agricultural sector. Financial analysts are already warning of the fiscal risks. To cushion the impact of these runaway subsidies, the government may be forced into strict expenditure rationalization, cutting funding to other critical areas. The fiscal buffer delays immediate famine, but the math is clear. It locks the government into an unsustainable cycle of subsidized dependency on foreign energy. The government cannot absorb the entire magnitude of this energy shock. Eventually, the pressure overflows, and inflation bleeds into the broader economy through increased logistics and raw material costs. Economists use a standard rule of thumb to measure crude oil shocks in India. For every 10% increase in crude prices, GDP growth drops by roughly 15 basis points, and inflation rises by 30 basis points. Applying that rule to the current data shows a sharp economic divergence. Consumer Price Index inflation has hit a 10-month high of 3.21. The most dangerous component of this metric is the price of essentials. Primary articles and food inflation surged to 6.36% in March. These energy constraints generate cascading effects down the entire supply chain. Manufacturing sectors face production limits, and transportation fuel becomes both scarce and expensive. This specific breed of cost-push inflation damages the economy from two directions at once. It drives up the daily cost of living for consumers while simultaneously slowing down productivity and increasing input costs across all industrial sectors. On paper, the Indian economy is thriving, with headline GDP growth reaching 8.2%, but that figure masks a different reality on the ground. This document from the recent household consumption expenditure data reveals the stark truth. While GDP grew at 8.2%, real consumption growth was only 3.5%. That decoupling means the impressive macroeconomic numbers are largely separated from actual household spending capacity. The economy is expanding, but the financial health of the average citizen is lagging far behind. This analysis points to an alarming warning sign in the report. The rise in food expenditure as a share of total spending is actively reversing a decade of economic progress. As economies develop and incomes rise, the percentage of a household budget spent on food should naturally shrink. That transition allows families to shift their discretionary spending toward education, healthcare, and wealth building. Instead, persistent inflation in food and essential commodities is consuming those budgets. It reduces disposable income and strictly limits upward economic mobility, particularly for rural households. Subsidies and buffers only treat the symptoms. The only long-term solution to this trap is achieving structural independence from imported fossil fuels. To sever the link between foreign conflicts and domestic food prices, the agricultural sector must transition. India has to replace fossil fuel-dependent urea with green ammonia, powered by domestic renewable energy. The economics for this transition already work. Utility-scale solar and wind power, paired with battery storage systems, is now cost-competitive in India compared to building new coal and gas plants. True economic resilience requires breaking the fossil agricultural doom loop. By utilizing domestic renewables to secure the agricultural supply chain, India can insulate its food supply from global choke points and finally protect the unit economics of the Indian household.